Good morning, students. Today we discuss the last topic in narratology, narration in philosophy. In the last few classes, we were discussing narration in literature. We discussed different theories, and then we moved to narration in history. Today, we are starting with narration in philosophy. All those philosophical texts have always used narratives in order to understand, in order to discover, explore the sense of self, identity formation, community, and politics. Philosophical texts are always interested in the ways where these stories and selves are connected, how identities are created within narratives. It has generated interest in philosophical text. All these philosophical texts try to identify the connection between narratives and selves. And philosophy's studies of all those moral values, identity, selfhood, that is, the sense of self, are quite often the studies of the narrative modes through which individuals construct his or her identity. So essentially, there is a link between philosophy and narration. Philosophy has its dependence on narratives, what we call as philosophical narratives. And all these philosophy depends on various kinds of narratives in order to understand human existence, moral values, life, truth. Philosophy takes the support of various modes of narratives to have an understanding of human existence in general. We come to philosophical narratives. As I said earlier, philosophy uses narratives and analyzes narratives in order to explain its arguments. Philosophy uses narrative to explain its arguments about all those abstract ideas. So it is basically philosophy, as you know, it is basically about rhetoric. It is the art of persuasive speech. As you know, these philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, they use this rhetoric, this art of persuasive speech, and they used this narrative to bring forth their ideas. We have Plato's concept of cave, the myth of the cave. He offers a mythic narrative in order to explain, in order to demonstrate the problem of knowledge. So he uses this myth of cave. And Francis Bacon, 16th century in England, another philosopher, you may know him as a great essay writer. Bacon had introduced this idea or image of a new country, New Atlantis. He termed it as New Atlantis. And this image of exploration and discovery, he used these images to promote a philosophy of learning. Bacon's essays you constantly used these images of travel, discovery, and he wanted to state that knowledge is a kind of a large empire that has to be constantly expanded. So he used these images, he took the support of the narratives to bring in larger concepts. Similarly, we have political philosophers who also relied on narratives. For example, James I of England, he was trying to argue that king is the head of the state and his role is ordained by God. It is something like God given. And here he uses the narrative of sickness and medicine to make his point. As he says, country, he stated country as body and king as physician. That is how he brought in this narrative of medicine, sickness, to bring in a larger idea. And we have other political philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke. They used this image of the city and a large organism to describe monarchy and the country, the images of organism and city. So, look at how these people relied on narratives to explain their arguments, and most importantly, all those religious texts which bring out all those philosophical ideas. They also use narrative modes to convey their ideas on truth, values, human life, principles of living, ethics. We have sacrifice as a constant theme in Islam and Christianity, and various ideals are given to us in these scriptures through the use of stories and narratives. You know, in Bible there are a lot of stories, lot of narratives through which all those ideals are brought to people. We have Job's story in Bible, which brings in the idea of faith. We have moral tales about Karna, Ravana. It is to establish some insights into various ideals, to have a general understanding of human existence, to have a clear picture on the ideas, like on all those abstract ideas like truth, moral values, etc. Even human rights philosophy have used narrative forms on a regular basis. For instance, we have Michael Ignatieff. He is a human rights philosopher. He argued that victims of atrocity, of all those cruelty, all those oppression, should tell their stories. And it is all those stories which will initiate a process of ethical response from all over the world. So, without these narratives of all those horrific instances, all those horrific cruelty happened to mankind, human rights as a movement cannot take off, according to Michael Ignatieff. So, human rights as a movement starts from these kind of narratives which come out from all those victims of oppression. And now we move to the next topic, the philosophical analysis of narrative. We have Paul Ricoeur, who said that human action can be understood only within an imaginative reconstruction of it. ഒരു ഹ്യൂമൻ ആക്ഷൻ മനസ്സിലാവണമെങ്കിൽ അതിനൊരു ഇമാജിനേറ്റീവ് റീകൺസ്ട്രക്ഷൻ നടത്തണം. And he uses the ideas of mimesis. He divides into 3 levels of mimesis. He says that the first level contains all those events and actions of human beings that constitute the first level. And in the second level, you integrate elements of situation, which brings in some order. Just like you make a story into a plot. So the first level, it is the story. Second level, it becomes a plot with the inclusion of situations. And you get the answers to these questions such as why, how, who, where, when. Because there is now an internal logic of the plot. As you see in the plot, there arise an internal logic. And third level, we integrate imaginative plotting into our everyday lives. We combine it with our everyday lives. So that is the way how philosophical narratives emerge. First, we have events and situations, events and actions. You add situations, and you get answers for these questions. Third level, you apply it to your everyday lives. So this is the idea brought about by Paul Ricoeur. For example, there is this analysis of speech and writing by Jacques Derrida. He is known as the founder of deconstruction. So he formulated a theory of Western philosophy. He had a reading of Rousseau, and he stated that speech is privileged in Western thinking. As speech, as you know, when someone speaks, there is this presence of that person there. There is something known as physical presence. While a writing can be done in the absence of the author, where the author writes and the written word is distributed among the readers without the author's presence. And hence, speech is given more importance to writing in Western philosophy. Here, when you talk about a philosophical narrative, how can you connect this to a philosophical narrative? Speech you equate with physical presence, writing with absence. Here, Derrida links a medium to a larger philosophical problem. What is that philosophical problem? The problem related to physical presence and identity. The speech implies the visible physical identity of the speaker, but the written word does not do so. It is equated with absence. It is opposite to physical presence. That is how these concepts are linked to greater philosophical problems. So this is an example. So girls, we come to the end of narratology, the chapter narratology. So this was indeed a long lecture starting from narrative modes, narrative techniques, textuality and reading. And I remind you again and again, this is the most important chapter in methodology and perspectives of humanities. When you come to class, we'll be having discussions on the major topics. But in my online class, I will be starting with the next topic, textuality, text-oriented approaches. That is my next topic. If you have any doubts, if you need any clarifications regarding narratology, please go through all these lectures, hear all these lectures and come to class. And we will have a discussion. Hope it is clear. Thank you, girls. Have a nice day.